Why host cities always build stadiums they don't need, and who actually pays. The summer of 1994, a country that barely knew the offside rule hosted the biggest sporting event on the planet. Here's what's interesting about that story. It wasn't a failure. It was, by the numbers, a triumph. And yet the thing everyone said would happen, the legacy, the infrastructure shift, the permanent elevation of the sport, arrived slowly, partially, and mostly for reasons that had nothing to do with the tournament itself. Now it's 2026. The World Cup is back on American soil. Bigger this time. 48 teams, 16 countries, 11 host cities across the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And the pitch, the economic pitch, the civic pitch, the transformational pitch sounds remarkably familiar. New York, Los Angeles, Dallas, Miami, Boston, Seattle. Each city has been told, and has told its residents, some version of the same story. The World Cup is coming. Hotels will fill. Restaurants will overflow. Global eyes will turn here. And somewhere in the fine print of every host city agreement, a number appears that doesn't make it into the press releases. That number is what this video is about. Not the goals. Not the upsets. Not which country lifts the trophy in July. The other number. Because here's the thing about mega events that almost never gets explained in the coverage leading up to them. The economics don't work the way the announcement sounds. Not because anyone is lying exactly, but because the model, the actual structural model of how a World Cup gets financed, built, and delivered, contains a mechanic that only makes sense once someone draws you the diagram. And once you see the diagram, you can't unsee it. In 1994, the United States inherited a template. In 2026, it's running that template at its largest scale ever. 11 cities, billions in infrastructure commitments, contracts with a private organization that pays no local taxes, keeps the broadcast rights, and will be wheels up before the last confetti hits the ground. That's not a conspiracy. That's the deal. That's how it was designed, agreed to, and signed. The question worth sitting with, the one this video will try to answer carefully and completely, is simply this: who pays? Every city that wants to host a World Cup match signs a document called a Host City Agreement. It runs to hundreds of pages. It covers stadium dimensions, training facility requirements, transportation corridors, media infrastructure, hospitality zones. It specifies, in precise contractual language, what the city must provide and what FIFA will deliver in return. What FIFA delivers: the tournament, the brand, the global broadcast, the 48 teams and the billions of eyeballs that follow them. What the city delivers: everything else. Now, here's where the mechanic gets interesting. Most of the 11 American host cities in 2026 are not building new stadiums. They're retrofitting existing ones. MetLife Stadium in New Jersey, AT&T Stadium in Dallas, SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles. These are already among the most expensive stadiums ever constructed, built within the last 15 years, largely on the promise of exactly this kind of global event. So the question shifts. If the stadiums already exist, where does the money go? Think of a city's financial commitment to a World Cup the way you'd think about a landlord preparing an apartment for a very specific, very demanding tenant. The tenant, FIFA, doesn't pay rent in the traditional sense. They bring the event. The landlord renovates, upgrades, installs, staffs, secures, and absorbs the operational costs. When the tenant leaves, the apartment is nicer. Whether that makes the renovation worth it depends entirely on what happens next. In Arlington, Texas, AT&T Stadium cost $1.3 billion to build in 2009. The city of Arlington financed a significant portion through a sales tax increase and hotel occupancy taxes, meaning every resident who bought a meal or booked a room helped pay for a stadium owned by Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys. The public contribution exceeded $325 million. The Cowboys keep the revenue. The city keeps the debt service schedule. This is not unique to Dallas. It is, functionally, the standard American stadium financing model. And the World Cup doesn't create this arrangement. It simply activates it. Cities that already have stadiums built on public subsidy now deploy those stadiums for a global event. And the costs of that deployment, the security, the infrastructure upgrades, the transportation logistics, the temporary overlay construction FIFA requires inside every venue, those costs run into the hundreds of millions per city. Los Angeles alone has projected World Cup-related infrastructure costs north of $160 million. FIFA's direct contribution to those costs, structured as a revenue share on ticket sales and commercial rights, which FIFA controls, prices, and distributes according to its own formula. There's a word for a financial structure where one party sets the terms, controls the revenue, and bears limited downside risk while the other party funds the physical infrastructure and absorbs operational exposure. Economists have several words for it, actually, but the one that matters here isn't any of those. The one that matters is the word cities use when they sign the agreement anyway. Opportunity. Because the promise, the reason this model keeps getting accepted, keeps getting signed, keeps getting celebrated at press conferences with the mayor and the governor and the FIFA delegate, is the multiplier effect. The idea that $1 spent on a mega event doesn't return $1. It returns 3, or 5, or 10. That tourists flood in, hotels overflow, restaurants run double shifts, and the whole metropolitan economy lifts for a month and leaves a permanent mark. It's a compelling idea. It also has a complicated relationship with what the data actually shows, which is exactly what a group of economists decided to measure, carefully, repeatedly, across multiple World Cups, multiple continents, multiple decades of host city data. Their findings didn't make it into the host city press releases. In 2004, an economist named Andrew Zimbalist started doing something relatively simple. He took the official projections that cities published before hosting major sporting events, the tourism forecasts, the job creation estimates, the GDP impact numbers, and he compared them to what actually happened afterward. He did this not once, not for one city. He did it systematically across decades of data, across multiple countries, across the full spectrum of mega events from Super Bowls to Olympics to World Cups. The gap between projection and reality was not small. It was not a rounding error. It was not a methodology dispute. It was, in study after study, a pattern consistent enough to have a name in academic literature. The flypaper effect, the substitution problem, the crowding out phenomenon, different names, same observation. Here is the core of it. When a major event comes to a city, it doesn't only attract new visitors. It also repels the visitors who would have come anyway. Business travelers reroute. Leisure tourists avoid the crowds and the prices. Conventions reschedule. The hotels that look full during the World Cup are partially full of people who displaced the guests that would have been there regardless. The new money coming in partially cancels the regular money that stayed away. In Atlanta, after the 1996 Olympics, researchers found that hotel revenues in surrounding regions actually increased more than in the host city itself, because travelers who wanted to visit Georgia that summer simply chose not to stay in Atlanta. In South Africa, after the 2010 World Cup, the projected 450,000 international visitors arrived as roughly 310,000. Tourism revenue came in at less than half the official forecast. The stadiums built specifically for the tournament, Green Point in Cape Town, Mbombela in Nelspruit, became expensive maintenance obligations within 3 years of the final whistle. And then there is Qatar. Qatar spent an estimated $220 billion preparing for the 2022 World Cup. That number is so large it requires a moment of stillness. $220 billion. For context, that is roughly the entire annual GDP of Portugal, spent on one tournament, 8 stadiums, several of which were designed from the beginning with post-event downsizing in mind, entire sections engineered to be dismantled and shipped to developing nations as a kind of infrastructural inheritance. Within 18 months of the final, capacity at most venues had been reduced by more than half. One stadium was already being converted into mixed-use development. The crowds that were supposed to sustain them were never coming back. Now, is the United States different? Structurally, yes. The American host cities in 2026 are not building white elephants. The stadiums exist. The infrastructure exists. The tourism industry is mature, diversified, and not dependent on a single event to validate itself. New York City will not need a World Cup to prove it is a destination. And yet, the projections are back. New York's host committee projected $200 million in direct economic impact. Dallas projected $400 million. Los Angeles, depending on which study you read, projects figures ranging from $300 million to over $1 billion. The range alone should give you pause. When the honest answer to how much will this generate spans a factor of 3. The number is not a measurement. It is a negotiating position. What the independent economists tend to agree on is narrower and less cinematic. Mega events generate real but modest direct spending. They generate significant intangible value, global visibility, civic energy, the kind of collective memory that a city carries for decades. They generate career-defining moments for local businesses positioned correctly around the event. What they reliably do not generate is the transformational economic shift that appears in the announcement. The gap between those two things, between what's promised and what's measurable, is not fraud. It's not even unique to sports. It's the oldest dynamic in public finance. Someone has to make the case for the expenditure. And the case always sounds better before the receipts come in. Which brings us to the question that reframes everything. If the numbers rarely deliver what's projected, why do cities keep signing? Not because they're naive. Not because the mayors and the finance committees haven't read the studies. Because the studies are measuring the wrong thing. The real return on a World Cup doesn't show up in tourism spreadsheets. It shows up somewhere else entirely. There is a concept in political science called the politics of spectacle. It's not a new idea. Roman emperors understood it. Renaissance city-states understood it. The 1936 Berlin Olympics understood it in ways that still make historians uncomfortable. The idea is straightforward. Large public events do something that infrastructure spending, tax policy, and economic reform cannot easily do. They make people feel something, collectively, simultaneously, in the same direction, and that feeling has measurable value, just not in the columns that the economists are usually checking. Walk through what actually happens to a city that hosts a World Cup match, not during the tournament but in the 5 years that follow. Real estate values within a 2-mile radius of major venues have shown consistent appreciation in post-event studies across multiple host cities. Not because the stadium is there, because the stadium required the city to fix the roads, upgrade the transit corridors, repave the pedestrian infrastructure, and install the kind of visible public investment that signals to developers. This neighborhood is a priority. The stadium is the excuse. The infrastructure is the product. In the Meadowlands area surrounding MetLife Stadium in New Jersey, the American Dream Mall complex, a $5 billion mixed-use development that sat unfinished for nearly 2 decades, finally opened in part because the surrounding infrastructure had been upgraded to World Cup specification. The event created the conditions. The real estate captured the value. This is not unique to New Jersey. It is, in various forms, the actual return on investment that city planners are quietly counting on when they sign the host city agreement. Now layer on top of that something harder to quantify but impossible to ignore: global media exposure. During the 2026 World Cup, 11 American cities will appear in broadcasts watched by an estimated 5 billion people. Not advertisements, not tourism campaigns. Organic broadcast coverage, stadium exteriors, city skylines, fan zones, cultural moments, delivered into living rooms in Indonesia, Brazil, Germany, Nigeria, and Japan. The conservative estimate for equivalent advertising value of that exposure runs into the hundreds of millions per city. Some analyses put it higher. The city of Dallas, for context, spent approximately $12 million on international tourism marketing in 2023. During 1 month of World Cup broadcasts, it will receive multiples of that in unpaid global visibility. You cannot buy that. You can only host it. And then there is the layer that almost never appears in the public conversation because it operates on a timeline that press releases don't cover. Diaspora activation. The United States in 2026 is hosting a World Cup in a country where the fastest-growing demographic segments have deep generational connections to the sport. Brazilian Americans, Mexican Americans, Nigerian Americans, Portuguese Americans. These communities don't just attend matches. They organize, they travel, they bring family from abroad. They spend in neighborhoods that standard tourism models don't capture, in restaurants, in community spaces, in local economies that sit outside the downtown hotel districts where the official projections are centered. This is the World Cup that the 1994 tournament was too early to fully unlock. The American soccer ecosystem in 2026 looks nothing like 1994. Major League Soccer has teams in most host cities. The USMNT carries genuine continental expectation for the first time in a generation. A generation of American kids grew up with the sport as a primary identity, not an exotic import. So who actually wins? FIFA wins. Structurally, contractually, by design. Tax-exempt status in host countries, full control of broadcast rights, commercial partnerships that generate revenue streams that never appear on the host city's balance sheet. FIFA's revenue from the 2022 World Cup was $7.5 billion. Their direct infrastructure contribution was a fraction of that. Real estate developers win, quietly on a 5-year timeline, in the zip codes adjacent to upgraded infrastructure. The cities win something real, just not what was promised. They win visibility, civic energy, and the kind of collective memory that shapes municipal identity for decades. Ask anyone who was in New York in 1994 about the atmosphere. Ask anyone who was in Paris in 1998. The memory is real. The $400 million projection. Less so. And the taxpayers? They paid for the landlord renovation. Whether they got a fair return depends on what you think a city is actually for. Whether you believe public spending on spectacle is legitimate investment or elegant misdirection. That's not a question this video will answer for you. Because honestly, that's the more interesting question to sit with yourself. You now have the diagram. You can see the machine. What you make of it is yours.